Warm greetings during this Christmas season. My name is Paul-André Durocher. I'm the Archbishop of Gatineau. Today, January 3rd, is the Sunday of Epiphany, a major feast day in the Christmas season. And we are going to look at the three readings of the day as we usually do in this series of reflections. We start with the prophet Isaiah. We've read so much of him during the Advent season. We go back to him during this feast of Epiphany, and we look at chapter 60, verses 1 to 6. And here Isaiah is writing in the context. The book of Isaiah is written in the context of the return of the exiles. There has been a great letdown, great disappointment among the exiles, that things have not been going as well as they had hoped. And they certainly don't have political independence, as they are under the thumb of the Persian empires, and they must pay taxes to this empire. And so it is here, in this context of depression, that Isaiah writes to them to encourage them to have hope that God's work is still not finished. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. Yes, he's inviting the people to arise and to be bold, to shine forth. But they don't have to do this on their own. It's because light is coming to them. It is the light of God. It is the glory of God rising upon Jerusalem. And the darkness is not over Jerusalem, it's over the whole world. Let's listen to this. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will appear over you, and nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. So this darkness is over the whole world. And light shines upon Jerusalem, and people from around the world, nations, are looking towards Jerusalem for this light and coming towards Jerusalem because of the light. Isaiah's vision really is one where the world is blessed through Israel because of Israel's faithfulness to God, and even more so because of God's faithfulness to Israel. Lift up your eyes and look around. They all gather together. They come to you. Who's coming? Well, first of all, your sons shall come from far away, and your daughters shall be carried on their nurses' arms. Not all the exiles came back. Not all of them returned, and some of them had gone to other countries. Isaiah foresees all of these exiles coming back and carried by the people from these other nations who are bringing back the sons and daughters of Israel, not just their sons and daughters. Then you shall see and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and rejoice, because the abundance of the sea shall be brought to you. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. So instead of Israel paying tribute and taxes to other nations will be bringing their wealth to Israel. A multitude of camels shall cover you, young camels from Midian and Ephah, and all those from Sheba shall come. So these are faraway countries, faraway regions, and they imagine caravans. Isaiah imagines caravans bringing goods to the people. And they shall bring gold and frankincense, and shall proclaim the praise of the Lord. The gold and the frankincense, the gold, I mean the wealth, and frankincense, produce that only exists in these other countries, they will bring this to Israel and proclaim the praise of the Lord. The Lord is short for Yahweh. They will praise the God of Israel because of what God is doing, bringing light into the world through the people of Israel. Obviously, the gold and the frankincense coming from far away, for Christians, right away we clue in the story of the Magi and Matthew's story of the birth of Jesus. We're going to come to that in a moment. But let's first go to the second reading, which is Ephesians. We're at chapter 3, verses 2 to 6. Paul's letter to the Ephesians is one where he explores some themes that are particularly dear to him. And one of them is the theme of God's plan being worked out, God's plan for the salvation of the world being worked out through Israel and then through Jesus and now through the church. And this plan, he calls it God's mystery. This plan was not known. It was not, people were not aware of it, but God was working out his plan. And now it's becoming evident. So in this short reflection, brothers and sisters, surely you've already heard of the commission of God's grace that was given me for you. So he's writing to this community and he says, you've heard of what God has done in me for you. God's grace working in me, but is for you, for all these new communities that are being founded by Paul and by others. And how the mystery was made known to me by revelation. This does not come, Paul did not calculate this. Paul did not deduce this from facts. It was revealed to him as part of his ministry. In his encounter with Jesus, he became aware of what God wanted to do through him and through Israel to the others. So he writes, in former generations, this mystery was not made known to humankind, as it has now been revealed to his holy apostles and prophets by the Spirit. So the Spirit working in the hearts of the apostles and the prophets of the new age, they are discovering what God's plan is. And what is it? That the Gentiles, the nations, have become fellow heirs and members of the same body, it's understood, with Israel, shares in the promise of Christ Jesus through the gospel. So what Isaiah had foreseen, that through Israel salvation, light would come to all the nations, this is now being worked out, Paul says, as he and the other apostles bring the good news to the Gentiles, to the pagans, to the Greco-Roman world, and that these pagans, these people of Greek inheritance, not Jewish, are coming to realize the goodness of God that is manifest in Jesus Christ. This has been God's plan from the beginning, and this is what is being worked out now. The reason we read this text on Epiphany Sunday is because of the meaning of the gospel story that we're going to read right now. Epiphany is the great feast of Christmas in the Eastern Church, you could say. For the Eastern Church, the 25th of December is less important, but the 6th of January, which is the traditional day of Epiphany, that's the great feast, because that's the feast where Jesus' birth is made known to all the nations. We could say that December 25th is Christmas seen through the eyes of St. Luke, and the Feast of the Epiphany is Christmas seen through the eyes of the Gospel of Matthew. And Luke's story is told particularly in terms of how it affects the poor and the marginalized of Israel when Jesus was born. So particularly the shepherds, people like Elizabeth, who is old and infertile, old people like Simeon and Hannah at the temple. All these people they're not the powerful people. They're not the leaders. They are the humble people. They recognize what is going on. And all of that gospel, all of Luke's gospel, will be very focused on how the good news changes the lives of the poor, the outcast, those who count for nothing. Matthew's gospel, Matthew doesn't speak about Elizabeth and Zachariah, doesn't speak about Simeon and Hannah in Jerusalem, doesn't speak about the shepherds and hearing the good news. It speaks about three magi coming from the east, magi, astrologers, we could say. Coming from the east, they've seen in the skies, they've read in the skies the news of the birth of somebody who's very important, and they come to Jerusalem, but they don't know who it is. So they go to the religious leaders of that time. Actually, they go to the secular leader, who is King Herod, who calls the religious leaders. And let's see what happens in this story. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judah, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews?" From their understanding, this is a king that is being born. "For we have observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." Now, it's interesting, the echoes here from the Old Testament, from the story of Balaam, a wise man from the east, a magus, somebody like these three wise men, that was called by an enemy of Israel to curse Israel. But when he came, he did not curse Israel. Balaam blessed Israel. And in blessing, he says, "I see a scepter rising out of Israel, a king. Israel's star is rising." So this prophecy of a star and of a scepter is kind of repeated here as these Magi coming from the east say, "We have heard of a king being born to the Jews, and we observed his star at the rising and have come to pay him homage." Now, when King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all of Jerusalem with him. Why frightened? Because of his power. He wants to hold on to his power. He's a puppet king. He's ruling through the good graces of the Emperor of Rome, Augustus. But he's the one who's in charge. And if Israel should have their own king, this would mean that he would be set aside. And the leaders of Jerusalem are scared, because the religious leaders are scared, because this means that could it be the Messiah? But what will this mean to their own power structure? So calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people. Do you see the difference between Luke here? Luke is all kind of the humble people, the outcasts. Matthew brings together the chief priests and the scribes, the leaders, along with the secular ruler. He inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. And they told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." So they go into the text of the Jewish scriptures, and they pull out some texts. They're kind of reworked in this telling of it, but at any rate, from their reading, it should be in Bethlehem. So Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star appeared. Now, this secrecy shows that it's a plot, and we'll find out later in the story that Herod actually wants to kill this child. He sends them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you've found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." This is a lie. This is an evil man. This man has killed his own children and his wife in order to protect his power. He's not at all interested in going to, pay homage to another king in the backyard. Anyway, when they had heard the king, they're unaware of this, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. This, my friends, is very much like Luke's telling, because Luke, everyone is filled with joy, particularly the shepherds. Here the Magi are filled with joy. They found the place, and on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and they paid him homage. And then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And so obviously here, the echo with the prophecy of Isaiah that we've just heard resounds very powerfully. The gold and the frankincense. The myrrh was not mentioned by Isaiah. Myrrh is an ointment that is used for embalming bodies. What does myrrh come and do here? Obviously, it's a foreshadowing of Jesus's own death. And the whole story here, Matthew plays it up to show how already secular rulers and religious rulers of Jerusalem are set against the Messiah. And in the same way, Pontius Pilate, who will be the secular ruler when Jesus will be an adult, and the chief priests and the elders, the Sanhedrin, they will condemn Jesus. So here we see already in the birth of Jesus the foreshadowing of what will happen to him on the cross. At the same time, we have a foreshadowing of what will happen after Easter. What will happen after Easter? The message will go out to other nations, to the Gentiles, and these magi represent these Gentiles. So you see what Paul was talking about, the God's plan being worked out, is being worked out here. And the story finishes, and having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. So here again, there's a dream. Matthew has a lot of dreams. A lot of messages are shared through dreams and through visions. Here, obviously, God intervenes and tells them not to come this way, go another way. It's interesting here to note in Matthew's telling of the story that somehow the other nations, their religions, point to the Messiah, also point. They're not completely mistaken, but they don't have the key. So it's as if, those who are not Jewish, at least in Matthew's understanding, were also able to guess at what God's plan was. But the key was in the Jewish scriptures. It was the chief priests, it was the scribes who had the key to God's will because God spoke through the prophets. God prepared Israel to receive Jesus. And some of the Jews did recognize Jesus. The 12, his apostles, his main apostles were all Jewish. They all came to that faith. Many did not. And it remains a mystery. For Paul it did, and for us today. We continue to believe that the first covenant with Israel is still a valid covenant, and God is still in relationship with the Jewish people, and they are in relationship with God through that covenant. But we also believe that the promises of the prophets were manifest through Jesus, and through him, that promise is now made available to all people who are not Jewish, including you and me. So we give thanks for the Feast of Epiphany, and for the love of God, and for God's plan, which is for all nations, for the whole world to be transformed. So Epiphany, yes, is another look at Christmas, at the birth of Jesus, from another perspective, with Matthew this time, pointing out different elements and basically making us realize that the message of the good news is for all nations, for all peoples. And today this is part of what it means for us to be Christians, is to take up our share in bringing that good news to others. There's still darkness in the world, and there's still a need for light. And the church now becomes the bearer of that light for the world. And that means us, individually, the disciples of Jesus. We are the bearers of that light for all of humanity. It's a remarkable task, a humbling task, but a beautiful one also. So may this Feast of Epiphany be an occasion to give thanks to God for the great gift, but at the same time, a renewal of our own commitment to take up the mission of Jesus for the good of the world. This is part of the mystery. This is God's plan. God bless.